Hello, everybody. It is now quite fashionable to talk about digital transformation in the shipping industry and how it's going to bring unprecedented change. But the industry is also accused of being steeped in tradition and deeply conservative. The strange thing is, looking back, I'm equally guilty of it. But what we do not realize is that for an industry to transform, change has to happen across it, both horizontally and vertically. To begin with, onboard digitalization of the ships with sensors, for example, then digitally enabling onshore managers and operators of maritime assets with the appropriate software systems, and finally, the other stakeholders in the industry who are enabled by data platforms that efficiently facilitate maritime transportation, such as ports, container yards, tanker terminals, etc. In the shipping industry, whether we acknowledge it or not, digital transformation has been happening, albeit subtly, for quite some time, and it has happened beginning at the grassroots. So let's look at what's been happening on the vessel. Remote and unmanned operations, for example, have already been happening internally on board for decades. Operation of machinery has moved from machinery spaces to the engine control room. I have personally been on ships where the engine control room is outside the machinery space and co-located with the cargo control room in the accommodation. On some ships, the engine control room is even higher and located on the bridge. Cargo operations are in fact not carried out from the cargo deck spaces or pump rooms, but from the cargo control rooms, as mentioned earlier, within the accommodation. Technology to run unmanned engine rooms have been around since the 1970s, and the 1990s saw GMDSS simplifying communications, removing the highly skilled radio officers in the process. For over 20 years, data platforms on board have been able to capture data from sensors, devices, equipment, and machinery on board and send it ashore, especially with the development of modern connectivity and communications capability. So let's now review changes that have occurred ashore, where operating and managing ships happen. Computerization and ERP systems have allowed uniformity across different departments. Data from various reports coming from the vessel, such as known reports, maintenance reports, incident reports, etc., are now reviewed by experts and archived ashore. Unlike in the past, analyzing data is revealing actionable insights into performance, efficiency, fuel saving, emissions, etc., while reducing delays, wastage, and failures. A digital system must take into consideration today's work setup and the informal information exchanges that are missed out, such as when people physically work together in offices and discuss work over lunch or at the office coffee machine. The picture below is indicative of managers in a crisis room ashore, digitally tracking and coordinating with a vessel during an incident. But it can also be a management team or members of the board in a typical maritime business. I certainly don't need to point out what is striking about this picture. But of course, any guesses are welcome. It is not an unknown fact that not just the industry works in silos, but even departments within individual companies act in silos. Technology, of course, has made it possible to reduce duplication while increasing visibility and transparency across the organizations. But going digital, if not done right, can have its own downsides too. Software solutions built to ease the tasks and specific to certain departments can digitally entrench technical, scheduling, and chartering teams further into their silos, unless they are built ground up for interoperability. But data-driven solutions also provide capabilities like anomaly detection, benchmarking, and traffic lighting, which means more ships can be managed by fewer people, and certainly not on Excel spreadsheets like they've done for decades. Data has invariably brought with it visibility and transparency into areas that were previously unseen. Regulators can now see non-compliance and create new regulations based on measured outcomes. Customers have visibility of emissions and the carbon footprint of articles and items they purchase. Now, armed with the new environmental consciousness, the end customer not just expects, but are now beginning to demand ethical and sustainable transportation. Recently, major commodity and energy traders have declared that they will disclose the carbon footprint of their maritime operations. Stakeholders and investors are now demanding CSR and ESG initiatives and evidence that future regulations will be met. Reporting requirements by the Swedish Stock Exchange and the Poseidon Principle being classic examples of these. So what is happening across global supply chains? Until early this year, there was great motivation for the supply chains to work on a just-in-time principle, with a strategy to minimize or even eliminate inventory. But the pandemic has shown that just-in-time can only work in an ideal world without disruptions. But in reality, the supply chains need to have flexibility and resilience, which only just-in-case can provide. Just-in-case meaning not eliminating inventory, but dynamically optimizing inventory to absorb supply chain shocks and disruptions. This is impossible without real-time data coming not just from across the industry, but from all key points along the global supply chain. There has also been a trend towards localization instead of globalization, which means disruptions will end up being local and not have global impact. Cargo is expected to be monitored and tracked all the way from the first mile to the last mile. This is going to dynamically improve supply chain management, and it is impossible without real-time data coming not just from across the industry, but from all key points along the global supply chain. Supply chains can no longer stop, which means cargo needs to move 24 hours a day without the need to adhere to human maximum work hours, mandatory rest periods, or take into consideration human hours, etc. This is only possible by going digital and with total automation. And what we need to realize is that for an industry to transform digitally, it has to happen right across it. Most of the modern commercial shipping history has been based on charter party contracts. Traditionally, both the charterer and shipowner have been dependent on the captain of the vessel for executing voyages, as per the terms of the charter party, and his reports and actions were of integrity and considered unbiased. Captains were therefore by default also the final authorities to take responsibility and sign documents such as the bills of lading. Charterers, brokers, shippers, consignees, etc. got most of the information from the captain through the ship owners. Data has turned this around. Data is now freely available from various sources such as agents, surveyors, ports, etc. when it comes to cargo, and numerous other sources when it comes to the position of the vessel, speed, arrival times, etc. Real-time availability of the data is creating a new normal, causing a structural rearrangement of the information trail in the industry. This is because data can literally be viewed by all interested parties at the same time. This has significantly reduced delays, and corrections to errors and mistakes can be made well in time. Progressive owners and charterers have built relationships based on trust, where they are willing to cooperate and work together for better efficiency and performance of their operations. Data seems to have awakened a willingness to share and jointly tackle issues such as emissions, carbon footprint, and environmental regulations. The industry has certainly been transforming for quite some time now, but some say the pace has picked up recently, especially during this pandemic. It will be interesting to see how things pan out in the future, and it will be wonderful to hear from others their point of view on how the industry is dealing with digital transformation.